Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. You are in a webinar called Iowa Wind Energy Siting, a Roadmap for Counties. Could go to the next slide. A couple logistics for today. We are in the webinar format, which means that everybody is off camera and muted by default. We ask that you use the Q&A box for your questions. We'll be monitoring those and answering them either as we go via typing, or we'll have time at the end for live questions. And then please use the chat tool if you have any technical concerns. If all of a sudden you can't hear or see anything, please let us know in the chat. Today's presenters, we are the Iowa Environmental Council. We're the largest environmental coalition in the state of Iowa. We work primarily on clean water and clean energy. We're committed to addressing both the climate crisis and the issues of environmental justice. We actively work on federal, state, and local public policy, and we engage Iowans statewide to build a just, healthy environment and sustainable future for all Iowans. We have over 100 member organizations and a staff of 15 people. Our presenters today are Steve Geyer. Steve is the Senior Energy Policy Counsel at IEC, and Jordan Oster. Jordan is our Energy Program Director. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Steve to share today's agenda.
All right, thanks, Hannah. So first, we'll just outline what our agenda is for the day and some of the goals. So first, we'll talk about wind in Iowa and sort of how much do we have, et cetera. Then we'll talk about the approval processes that are available to counties as they actually potentially permit one of these facilities. We'll talk about system design recommendations, and then also a category just from construction to decommissioning. And then we'll wrap up with a conclusion. So, Jordan, next. So where do we stand right now in Iowa? As we are today, over half of our counties, 99 counties, have utility scale wind. In 2024, wind actually accounted for 66% of our electricity used in Iowa. As of April of 26, we had 13,411 megawatts of wind in Iowa. But importantly, it's the technical potential that we're looking at too. Technical potential meaning how much could a state generate based on the wind resources that we have. And we have a very good wind resource that could actually accommodate 270,000 megawatts to 570,000 megawatts. Far more, by the way, than we need, but that is the potential we have. Next. So where are the facilities? This is a map. Obviously, the dots showing where the facilities actually are today. The relative size denoted by the size of the dot. But obviously, this is not detailed enough. But if you want to read the report, we did include an appendix, Appendix B, which actually will give you the data behind all the dots, the counties that they're in, the size of facility, the name of facility, and importantly, who owns that facility. So next. So the economic impacts of wind. So wind energy keeps utility rates low. How does it do this? Because wind is one of our lowest cost forms of energy. And so as we contrast that to, for instance, a coal plant or even a natural gas plant, my wind facility is going to be producing somewhere in the penny and a half per kilowatt hour. My coal facility and or my gas facility is likely to be coming in closer to 3 cents, 4 cents per kilowatt hour. So the more I run the wind, the lower it keeps the overall utility rates. Other economic impacts. So in 2025, Mid-American paid $60 million in landowner lease payments to over 4,000 property owners in the state. Also in 25, Mid-American paid $60 million in property taxes across 35 counties. Lease payments. These are things that actually impact the farmers and the landowners themselves. And so lease payments today range from $5,000 to $10,000 per turbine annually over 20 to 30 years. In other words, the life of that facility. For many farmers, this is a lifesaver in terms of making sure that they can actually have a black income as opposed to the red income, which no one wants, losing money. 2024, also we had 3,895 Iowans working in the wind energy generation field. That fluctuates, but that is employment that's not only the construction of the individuals building the turbines, but is also individuals that maintain those turbines. So next. So how is generation sited in Iowa? The Iowa Utilities Commission actually is responsible for siting anything that is greater than 25 megawatts. Now, the interesting twist on this is that years ago, when the first wind facilities were being built in Iowa, a gathering line standard was adopted, and the commission bought off on it. And so what it says is that maybe I have a 400 megawatt wind farm, but if all of my turbines basically are connected to lines where each line only has less than 25 megawatts, then the only approval I need is actually county approval, and I don't need to have the commission approval for a siting certificate for these facilities. So what is then some of the result of this? Clearly what we're seeing and have seen is we have inconsistent ordinances. Some have effectively banned facilities, others have moratoria. And so that also then has started to lead to statewide siting legislation being proposed to try and address these inconsistencies that have cropped up. In April of 26, just as another side note, the Utilities Commission actually used their legislative authority that actually overrode a county ordinance in a project called River City Energy, which is in Saragota County. Next. So I'm going to expand on this just a little bit, but I'm going to start, in fact, even before this slide. So Section 331 of the Code of Iowa says that counties can exercise power as long as it's not inconsistent with state law. And that then also says that ordinances must be in accordance with Section 335. And so 335, and you gotta love the way that all these ordinances connect together and all these statutes connect together. 335 actually says that regulations must be in compliance or consistent with the comprehensive plan. And again, something that doesn't quite show up here, but that counties should consider the smart planning principles, which are then found in Code Section 18 of the code, which that portion of that code says that you should promote clean and renewable energy. Back to the consistency aspect, this is where 47653A comes in, where the intent of the general legislature was to encourage the development and basically have renewable power generation. And the goal is actually to promote it, but to attract both electric power and transmission facilities as part of the state goal. So let's see, recommend. Yep, and so we recommend that county ordinances align with this as you basically look at your comprehensive plan and effectively then your ordinances. Next. So what are the processes that are available? Two primary processes. You're going to have a permitted use or a conditional use is what the county basically can utilize. And so next, Jordan. So the county permitted use. So the county staff will review the projects to determine if it's compliant with the objective ordinance requirements. If the project complies with the ordinance, then it moves forward, likely be basically generating either a building or construction permit, which is typically issued with this approach. On the right-hand side, you'll see a permitted use language as an example. And I'll point out Appendix A, actually, of the siting guide actually has then links to various ordinances around the state, which where the examples actually are coming from. Next, Jordan. So the other process is a project must meet conditions spelled out in the ordinance. So conditional uses can only be permitted subject to the review and the approval by the county zoning board of adjustment after a public hearing. So when the zoning board looks at it, they have to base the decision on the evidence presented in the public meeting, evaluate the project based on its compliance with or not with the conditions within the ordinance. And if the conditions are met, then the conditional use permit will be issued. Jordan? And so this is an example. Similarly, you can find language or links in the Appendix A, but it lays out sort of conditional use language. I will draw a little bit of note there. The very last portion of that. So without limiting the foregoing, the zoning board of adjustment may attach to a permit conditions it deems necessary to protect the health, safety, and general welfare of the public, which I believe is important as the primary criteria for the county as it actually adopts ordinances. And so I think with that, I will switch and turn it over to Jordan.
Thank you very much, Steve, and good afternoon to those attending. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to run through a number of different provisions that typically make up the bulk of a typical wind energy ordinance that we see within counties. And we're going to run through a number of different parts of the ordinance, but also try to give some basic recommendations that can help county decision makers as they are shaping up these rules and regulations. Really, one of the big things that we're going to address and we'll address first is around setbacks. And nearly all counties that have a wind ordinance have provisions typically that have minimum distances for between the wind turbines and other structures. One of the key ones is around occupied or residential dwellings. Most counties have also adopted setbacks for from other types of structures. Sometimes that's occupied or public buildings. Sometimes that's schools or hospitals. Or we also see them addressing rights of way, roads, natural areas, and municipal town limits. Basically, the setbacks are there to help provide both. It's kind of the primary tool that counties use for both safety considerations and for mitigating sound and visual impacts from a wind project. When we're looking at wind projects, we really do kind of want to meet that Goldilocks principle, being in just the right zone. We want setbacks that are appropriate and that strike a balance between enabling cost-effective development and additional interest within the county and its residents. Very large setbacks from homes and property lines and other types of properties or areas that can restrict the number of sites available for wind energy development and therefore raise the cost of investing in wind power and the amount of investment that a county can attract. Conversely, setbacks that are too small may not successfully minimize sound or visual impacts on nearby properties. Again, setbacks are the primary tool that are used to address these safety concerns and to meet sound and visual impacts. We're going to look a little bit here. First, maybe I'll kind of point you to the visual at the bottom of this document. We have close to a quarter of a century now of utility scale wind development in the state of Iowa as an early pioneer. But you can see over that last 25 years, we've also seen an increasing height in the different turbines that are on the landscape. This height has allowed for increased efficiency and production from each individual turbine. It's also allowed us to move into different parts of the state that have a weaker wind resource that can be captured now by these taller turbines. What we here at the Iowa Environmental Council recommend is tying the setbacks to a multiplier. So unlike setbacks expressed as a fixed distance in feet, setbacks based on multiples of turbine height, they scale automatically. as turbine technology becomes taller and more advanced. And this approach helps ordinances from becoming outdated and maintains a consistent margin of safety. As you can see at the bottom of this slide, maybe I'll start with kind of that key recommendation, looking at setbacks from occupied residences. We recommend 2 times tower height as a setback from occupied residences. So let's say your turbine tower to the tip of the blade is 600 feet. That'd be a 1,200-foot setback from that occupied residence. I'm going to run through some of the common recommendations that we do have for different setback distances. As I mentioned, an occupied or human-occupied building or dwelling, 2 times tower height is what we recommend, something that can adapt to the changing heights of towers. We recommend for property line setbacks a distance of 1.1 times tower height. In the rare event of a turbine failure, that should provide protection for a neighboring property. Similarly, you see that 1.1 times standard often applied to unoccupied structures, roads, and other rights of way within a county. I talked about this a little bit earlier. Sometimes there are natural areas or historical areas or other places that a county might define as a sensitive site that they would also like to make sure there is a protection with a setback. We've seen counties deal with this in their ordinances in a lot of different ways over the years. And what we recommend in this updated guide is now a 3 times turbine height for setbacks from these pre-identified sensitive sites, usually identified in a comprehensive plan, perhaps. And we think the 3 times tower height is a good kind of basic standard to provide that protection. We have seen longer setbacks in other counties, but just in our recommendations, I think this is a good way for a starting point to lay out and to protect those specific areas. And finally, regarding setbacks, we do recommend that counties allow for a waiver process that would allow for reductions of setbacks when 2 neighboring property owners are in agreement. Still, waivers are not a good replacement for a good setback policy. So really, thinking about setbacks as that primary protector of safety and also negating other associated causes with wind energy projects. I'm going to talk a little bit about safety and signage. This is something that's very common to the ordinances that we see across the state. Some of the common things that we see within these ordinances are requirements for posting emergency contact information within various areas of a wind project. It can be just really simple things like making sure that the doorway at the base of a turbine tower is locked to prevent access. Also preventing any other risks that might come from individuals who might be improperly entering into a project area. So just to have a suite of recommendations that you can find here with a little bit more detail laid out within these recommendations. We also address within our guide meteorological towers. A meteorological tower is usually something that comes in advance of a wind project. This is something that is trying to measure wind speed and trying to figure out where the best places within the county to place turbines are. We know that these meteorological towers do have an enhanced risk to crop dusters. We also have seen in recent years the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, has proposed some new rules that would address some common national safety standards for Met towers, but these have not yet been adopted. In lieu of that, we do have some recommended language that we share here on the right side that's also fairly similar to what you see in practice in a number of different places around the state. But really, it's making sure that areas that are potentially dangerous, especially for planes, are visible, and making sure that um, these are well defined in how they are being marked and protected. Sound is definitely an issue we hear about as a concern at the local level with wind projects. As I mentioned before, we do think that a proper setback really should negate a lot of the concerns that folks might have around the sound produced by a wind turbine. We have seen a smattering of counties that have included sound level limits in their standards for wind turbines. We typically see this in a range of 50 dBA to 60 dBA. Just to give you kind of a idea of what that sounds like, 50 dBA might be an electrical fan in the same room as you that you're hearing. 60 dBA equivalent might be a washing machine or a dishwasher running in the same room as you. So just trying to give you a little bit of a sense of what kind of sounds, the level of sound might be at an affected property. When developers do have the ability and tools to do modeling and to figure out what that impact of sound might be for folks, but still at the same time it's not always the most accurate. There's other topology and other concerns that might affect how sound reaches a building. But typically, we've seen sound recommendations trying to address sound that is at an occupied residence and on the outside of that structure. And as we mentioned previously, we do think that a lot of this can be allayed and answered by that 2 times height minimum setback. But if a county does pursue this within an ordinance, we do have some model recommended language for that as well. I think when developers have been able to model this, I'm getting ahead of myself. So are able to model some of this and to work to mitigate. Apologies. We'll move on to our lighting recommendations here next. We do hear from different folks about the lighting, the safety lighting that comes at the top of wind turbine towers. We know that wind turbines are subject to federal aviation safety requirements that do require those obstruction lights or sometimes the red flashing lights that you see on the horizon if you're driving to Iowa at night. We do have a potential answer for that has arisen in the last few years. There is new technology called aircraft detection lighting systems, or ADLS. That is kind of an alternative to mitigate the impact of those lights at nighttime. These are radar activated, and when a airplane or aircraft enters within a set radius of the turbine, that's when the lights will activate. This is really kind of a good solution to make sure we maintain that required safety standard, but also to address what people see as an issue with a wind project coming into their area. Voluntarily, Mid-American Energy has indicated that they're working on implementing ADLS in a number of their existing projects. We've also seen Alliant Energy in some of their latest county proposals looking to do that as well. Counties in recent years have started putting this as a requirement in county ordinances, and we do think that this is something that can be requested, addresses one of those issues that folks have with the siting of wind turbines. All of this with the caveat that it must be approved by the FAA. So even if you put those restrictions in place, the developer or the utility will have to get federal approval for those lighting systems. Shadow flicker is another area that is a issue that folks raise along with sound, and I'll again raise here that a proper setback should do a lot to negate and limit the effects on neighboring property from shadow flicker. Shadow flicker, occurs, just at certain times of the year, when the light is coming over the horizon at the right time and interacting with the blades, and that can send the shadow of a tall turbine onto a neighboring property. Really, when you think about shadow flicker and what you're trying to prevent, really you're thinking about that occupied residence. A shadow flicker requirement that's protecting an unoccupied pasture or a corn or soy field, that's not really a requirement that's helping people or trying to find that balance approach. But for homes that are near a project area, you can model for how a shadow flicker will fall onto an affected property. We have seen a number of counties within the state adopt restrictions saying it can't be more than 30 hours a year of shadow flicker onto an occupied residence or more than 30 minutes a day. We do know that the development companies do have the ability to model for how light might fall on a property, and that also might dictate how they might potentially move a turbine to not cause that effect onto a property. We don't necessarily recommend a separate shadow flicker requirement as a standard practice. As I said, the setback requirement should do a lot of that work. Yet, if you do adopt this type of requirement, we do recommend a waiver approach here. Could be helpful, especially if folks feel unaffected or are not worried about the effects of shadow flicker. I do have here just some of that sample language. If you can check that out. Basically, counties have gotten fairly specific with the amount of time that is allowed for shadow flicker. I also, kind of note here, this is kind of a bigger, setback idea or theory as well. Just because a turbine can go 2 times tower height from a home doesn't mean the developer is necessarily going to place it that close as well. There's a lot of modeling to figure out, where the best places for turbines are going to be. And, when it comes to both sound and shadow flicker, the best place in a project area might not be near that occupied residence, yet the setbacks do protect in those cases where they are. I want to point to height restriction recommendations. We do not recommend establishing a separate restriction for the height of a turbine. As we pointed out in that earlier graphic, it is hard to predict, where the future of that is going to go. But somebody putting in a height restriction in 2020 or in the year 2000, would have ruled out just a lot of growth and a lot of different technology came since that point. I think that the appropriate setback distances from residences and structures at the ground level, that really will address the concerns that folks have about the height of turbines. And as that technology grows, those setbacks also grow in place as well. Repowering, I'd like to share a little bit about this. Repowering is the idea that existing wind energy systems can be upgraded or modified through a process of replacement or upgrades known as repowering. These changes are often made to improve efficiency and increase energy production, and they can really extend the life of a project beyond what was initially projected. You know, repowering is much more common right now than decommissioning. We're going to talk about decommissioning the end of life of projects, but you're more likely to see a project be upgraded than you are to see a project sunsetted. One thing that we want to acknowledge here as well, we've kind of changed our approach from being prescriptive on the distance, setback distances, and moving more toward multiplier recommendation. We do recommend if a project is proposed to be repowered to a county, that if there are turbines that now run afoul of setback distances, that those should be addressed and potentially moved elsewhere within a project area. So as we've been maintaining, the safety of the setbacks are kind of the key reason for them. And when we do repowering, we should make sure that turbines do keep up with new standards and provide that same level of protection. In many cases, turbines are going to be located well within a project area and a project boundary. They're going to exceed minimum setback requirements, and they probably won't need to be touched. I'm going to talk a little bit about acreage and turbine caps. We have heard more of this discussion when it comes to solar power, but it does often come up with wind energy discussion as well. We don't recommend that counties impose caps on total land area, the number of turbines, or the overall footprint for utility scale wind projects. Utility scale wind projects, they really require significant geographical flexibility to be able to optimize turbine placement based on the wind resource, the topography, the setbacks, and where transmission access is located in the county. And when you have development caps, that can force inefficient layouts. It can limit the size of a project, and it can require developers to piece together multiple smaller sites. And that just increases the cost for a project, or can increase or could complicate permitting. So we really, don't see these as a productive way to address wind energy. We know that the footprint of most of the turbine areas is typically an acre or under for what is being occupied for a wind turbine in operation. And in Iowa, we've seen that wind energy is really very compatible with agriculture. Turbines occupy that small portion where they're set, and that allows the surrounding land to remain in production, including row crops and grazing. And the restrictive caps can really take away these shared land use benefits, and also seeing farmers taking advantage of both agriculture or grazing, but also the ability to make lease payments from wind energy. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means when the project is going up, and also maintenance and decommissioning of a project. This is really an important aspect of any wind energy ordinances, infrastructure, and road use. It's obviously a really big concern of local residents, but also county government thinking about the infrastructure. And there's ways to protect yourself with a well-written ordinance to make sure that the conditions of the roads following your project match or exceed what they were prior to that. And we know, and you can't get around it, that wind turbines are heavy, and moving the pieces and the equipment it does have an impact on roads, bridges, and other infrastructure. And luckily there are a lot of great examples from across the state of counties putting in protections pre-construction and post-construction to make sure that all of the potential impacts are addressed. This is also really important too, to have this part of an ordinance right away. It just adds clarity to developers, and it can just provide for better outcomes at the end, knowing who will take care of what and in what fashion. Might be a little bit hard to see on your screens, but we do have our example language here. There's been some good counties out there, Poweshiek County, Union County, that have had some pretty strong road use agreements. As I mentioned, pre-construction survey, often, working with your county engineer to go out and see the route that the construction will take, and assessing the current condition. We talk here as well, how can the developers put in place dust control measures and other things that might bother nearby residents during construction. We hear a lot about drainage and how that can be addressed, and this is just a simple way to protect yourself there, to put the responsibility on the developer for any damages. The post-construction survey is also important to go there and see and check from what you found originally to the post-project state of things. And finally, something that we see quite commonly within these ordinances as well, might be a financial security tied to these potential infrastructure improvements. I'm going to address now you have your wind farm in place. The emergency response plan is another thing that we do advocate for. The American Planning Association also has a recommendation around this, that it should be on the developers to provide an emergency plan for all different scenarios. At the local level, not all response crews, have a plan for dealing with a wind turbine, let alone, tall structures in Iowa. So, just making sure that, the developers and local response are on the same page ahead of time. Again, this is something that can be a requirement as part of an application for a developer. And finally, decommissioning. As I mentioned, there's not a lot of examples of decommissioning, happening in the state so far. We have, the shelf life of, some of those early developments were, 20 to 30 years, and now we're looking at maybe a 40-year timescale for some of the newer technology that is going in place. That doesn't mean that a county should not be prepared for the end of a project life. And, there are plenty of strong examples throughout the ordinances that we've reviewed statewide that require a project owner to take responsibility for the cost of decommissioning at the end of a project's life. This is something for safety. It's also making sure we have no blight if you have something that's non-operational. Also to make sure that the county would not, or a landowner is not going to bear any burden for removal. This is another long piece of text for you to look at, but also available within our written guide. Again, you're not alone if you're looking for a decommissioning plan. There's a lot of good examples, but usually what they will outline is discontinuation. That's just kind of a process for figuring out how do you actually say, yes, this is no longer a project that plans on producing in the future. A decommissioning plan itself, so how and when the developer or project owner will deal with the decommissioning and removal of the project. And finally, this is a really important component, having some kind of decommissioning fund. This can be a bond or a security that says, the company has the financial wherewithal to be able to take on the removal of this process or removal of a project into the future. Well, that was a quick run through on some of the major components of a wind energy ordinance. I want to run through just some basic conclusions for folks here. For counties interested in attracting local benefits that come with wind energy generation, a well-drafted and balanced wind siting ordinance is an important initial step. We have not identified a single model ordinance in any particular county that we would recommend in total. Instead, our guide is identifying the strongest parts of different ordinances to include through sample language. Most counties, ordinances have additional provisions in their adopted ordinances, but we have really focused on things that are critical to a successful ordinance. We believe that clarity and predictability that comes from adopting a wind ordinance is beneficial for the county, its residents, and wind developers. And that is our conclusion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. And just want to mention our acknowledgement here that the work that we have on this and other material is based on support from the Department of Energy through the Reliable Energy Siting through Technical Engagement and Planning Program, the RSTEP program. And so we are grateful for the funding to help us move this mission along. And with that,
we will begin taking questions. I don't see any in the Q&A box just yet, but we'll give people a moment to type those in. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and write them in the Q&A box and we will get Steve and Jordan to answer those. In the meantime, I will share a link to the guide in the chat. Okay, I think if there are no questions, we can go ahead and close. Do either of you have any final comments you'd like to make?
I'll just add that we're happy to be a resource here at the Iowa Environmental Council. Please feel free to reach out to us directly if you have questions, but also reference the siting guide shared at the chat or the resources page of our website. We also have a solar siting guide that came out last summer that is a similar format to this. So if you're interested in seeing our recommendations around solar energy projects, check it out there. And mark your calendar. A year from now, we are planning on releasing a storage siting guide, so battery energy storage system guide for local officials. So we hope that we can be helpful and provide any assistance that you might need as you're thinking through these questions.
I would just add, Jordan, that as a part of the RSTEP process, we also have facilitated and will facilitate facility tours, and also as a part of the process, actually have meetings with county officials should they desire.
Okay, and with that, I think we will, oh, just kidding. I just saw a Q&A come in. Somebody would like to know if the state or federal government supplies any funding for wind energy construction.
Not that I'm aware of. There, at the point in time where there was a tax credit, companies could take advantage of that, but I'm unaware of any direct funding.
Yeah, the tax credit previously, or it's expiring, a production tax credit. So that was just based on the megawatt hours produced or the kilowatt hours produced by the wind turbine. So nothing as a general incentive for building, but just on the production side after it has been built.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions here. So we can go ahead and wrap up for the day. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Jordan and Steve, for presenting. Have a nice afternoon.